A good villain can not only steal the show, it can define the movie itself. You can't think of The Lion King without thinking of Scar, whose lust for power makes him impossible to forget. Frollo is perhaps the thing remembered most about the Hunchback of Notre Dame due to how uniquely real he felt. But what about villains like Bellwether, who were actually remembered for how poorly they were pulled off? What makes her and many others fall flat? Let's talk about how not to do a villain right. There are 4 core elements that need to be present in a villain in order for them to properly work in a story, and one of them is motivation. A good villain should have a clear reason for why they are who they are and why they do what they do. Something that drives them from point A to point B. Something that gives them a purpose behind the dastardly deeds they do. It can be personal, like Scar's desire to emerge from his brother's shadow, or more physical, like Commander Rourke's hunt for the power of Atlantis. Either way, it needs to be firmly understood and clearly broadcasted, something that doesn't exactly happen with Zootopia's twist villain Bellwether. For most of the film, we know Bellwether to a mild-mannered, happy-go-lucky assistant to City Hall, who later turns out to be the mastermind behind the entire plot of staging predator attacks. Now, twist villains can work and can be genuinely shocking, but everything about Bellwether's turn is underwhelming and screams of being shocking for shock's sake. But what really makes this reveal fall flat is how weak her motivation is presented. The entire reasoning for her plan to paint predators as dangerous comes from her ideological belief that she can amass power by controlling the population through fear.
90% of the population united against a common enemy will be unstoppable.
A fine reasoning at face value, but while we fully understand the what, we don't get enough of the why. Her plot isn't motivated by personal wounds or past trauma. She just simply wants control. To make this desire feel impactful and memorable, it needs to have some sort of deeper connection to the character. Compare her to another more well-executed twist villain, Lotso from Toy Story 3. Lotso's whole motivation is driven by the grievance of being abandoned years ago, so we can understand not only his surface level reason for wanting power, but the emotional reason as well.
She loved you, Lotso. She never loved me.
Bellwether is completely lacking in that emotional department, and not only does the character suffer for it, but so does her unveiling as the true villain. Perhaps the most frustrating thing about her entire arc is how easy it could have been to give her a deeper motivation. Maybe the movie could have really driven home her inferiority complex underneath the predators of Zootopia, not just as physical threats, but societal threats as well. Predators could have been viewed as more desirable or more sought after in her line of work, strengthening her desire to slander them. This would also have dug deeper into the reflections of real-world issues of class and race that Zootopia attempted to tackle. But what we were left with is someone motivated simply by power with no real redeeming qualities to elevate them beyond being painfully forgettable. But when the film isn't doing a twist villain, it's building the bad guy up through proper setup, taking time to establish just how bad the villain is going to be through environmental clues, frightened whispers of others, or a staggering introduction goes a long way in making the villain appear to be a credible threat. But then you have the likes of Morgana from The Little Mermaid 2, who the film fails to set up as anything other than the reheated leftovers from the prior movie. Morgana is the sister of Ursula, the incredibly iconic villain of the first film. Yet Morgana lacks the same gravitas the prior film was so kind to award Ursula. When Ursula is first introduced, she's given a threatening, foreboding aura as she stalks and spies on Ariel. We quickly learn her motivation for doing so, being a scorned former royal seeking revenge on King Triton and his family.
She may be the key to Triton's undoing.
While her motives and characteristics are mostly told to us rather than shown, it's done in a way reflective of a self-absorbed diva with a vendetta. Morgana's introduction is not handled as cleanly. Without any real build-up or haunting foreshadowing to speak of, Morgana kind of just appears. Sebastian even has a line of being familiar with her, speaking as if her identity is known by many, except for the most important people, the audience.
Ursula's crazy sister!
The abruptness of her arrival isn't the only issue with her setup, as from the get-go, she is painted to be Ursula but inferior. Riding off the coattails of an iconic villain that came before you is no easy task, and unfortunately for Morgana, she isn't built up to be someone who should be taken seriously. She speaks of feeling inferior to Ursula, labeling her late sister as mother's favorite.
It was always Ursula this or Ursula that.
However, this is played as a comedic line rather than a serious emotional motivation, so we, as an audience, are less inclined to invest any sort of interest into what she plans to do. And to make matters worse, she's easily thwarted in her first appearance, already telling the audience that she is not as powerful or as cunning as her late sister. And while Morgana achieves later success in the film, she's already set up to fail in the eyes of the audience because of that introduction. This isn't the tale of a lesser villain rising to power in spite of the assumptions of those around her. This is a villain that is told to us is a big deal, yet her actions, her reasoning, and the entire concept of her character begs to differ. She is practically dead on arrival because the film doesn't manage to lay the fundamental narrative groundwork a villain needs to make an impact. I guess you can't expect too much from direct-to-video Disney sequels, but surely something could have been done instead of Ursula, but worse. But once the villain has been properly set up and a motivation has been established, they must continue to be an active part of the film's conflict. This can be done in a traditional manner, like a villain constantly creating roadblocks for the hero, such as Hades and Hercules. However, sometimes the villain's presence in the conflict is felt more than it's seen. Ernesto de la Cruz is a great example of this, because before we even meet him, we know he is the catalyst for Miguel's quest through the land of the dead. He influences the flow of the plot without us fully realizing it. The actions of both of these villains actually matter to the journey of our hero, which is something that can't really be said about Mordu from Brave. Now, the concept of Mordu isn't his downfall. A disgraced prince cursed to roam the earth as a bear has a lot of potential. His ultimate downfall as a character actually comes down to the kind of movie he's stuck in.
Come on, you!
Brave is a film largely centered around the conflict between Merida and Eleanor, the severing and mending of a mother-slash-daughter relationship. The overall conflict remains more of an emotional one, as Merida strives for independence while Eleanor hopes to impose tradition on her daughter. So how does a big demonic bear fit into all of this? Unfortunately, Mordu is relegated to sporadic appearances for narrative convenience rather than having any effect on the true heart of the story. And here's why that is a huge issue. A good villain is not only meant to be an obstacle for the hero, but something that challenges them on a deeper level. With Ernesto de la Cruz, he represents the corruption of art, using it for power and glory rather than an expression of the human heart. This shatters Miguel, not just because his idol turns out to be a fraud, but because his entire being was molded by Cruz's music, and in the moment, all meaning behind his passion is lost.
Everyone knows you're the good guy.
Mordu simply serves as antagonist because the film assumes it needs one. He isn't entirely connected to the spell Merida tries to undo. He doesn't impact or sway the relationship between mother and daughter, and he has next to no impact on the emotional stakes of the story. All he really does is provide brief moments of intensity that doesn't ring throughout the rest of the film. There's very little consequence to his actions, rarely ever raising the stakes or forcing the characters to change or look inside themselves. And while there is some symbolism in his death, As Merida doesn't want her mother to suffer the same fate, he remains so detached from the core of the story that you don't really feel anything for him by then. He's purely a physical threat, but not one that the story really benefits from. And after the villain has been introduced, their motivations have been made clear, and they've successfully wreaked havoc on the protagonist throughout the film. It's time to give them their payoff. The big moment where the film culminates around the well-earned defeat of the villain, which can come in a variety of flavors. Classic Disney had a penchant for satisfyingly killing off their antagonists, whether it be Clayton's jungle hanging in Tarzan or Frollo's symbolically plummeting into hell in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. But sometimes a villain can be rehabilitated, usually after an appeal to their humanity, like Anton Ego in Ratatouille, but every now and then you have a villain end that amounts to a whole lot of nothing, which is essentially what happened with Eris and Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas.
I pull one tiny thread and their whole world unravels into chaos.
Eris is the seductive goddess of chaos, and with a character archetype like that, you would probably expect her not to play by the rules. After all, she's a cosmic force capable of manipulating the tides and sending a slew of minions after Sinbad and his crew. With seemingly every tool at her advantage and her penchant for not playing fairly, you would be surprised to see her remaining true to her word in the film's climax. When Sinbad returns to Syracuse to be executed, this causes Eris to step in, befuddled by Sinbad honoring his side of the deal they made at the beginning of the movie, something Eris was banking on the sailor's selfish nature to get in the way of. This causes her to step in, save Sinbad's life, and return the Book of Peace, the item she sought to obtain since the beginning of the film. This completely goes against the nature of the character who was ready to send Sinbad off to his death and plunge the kingdom into darkness. In the end, she's shocked by the thief's honesty and honor bound by their deal. She decides to spare him to no real benefit of her own.
This has got to be a little embarrassing for you, Eris.
Don't push your luck, Sinbad.
Now, this could have been more impactful if this act of selfishness led her to viewing humanity and the world in a different, meaningful way, but this isn't the case. In fact, she plans to continue her habit of sowing chaos across the world. This lack of development fights against the noble decisions she makes, contradicting her very nature without much change to her core ideals. Additionally, other than giving up the Book of Peace, something she could easily steal again if she so chooses, she doesn't exactly lose in a satisfying way. For a being of unbridled chaos, her resolution is shockingly clean and void of any actual consequences. Compare her resolution to another god like Hades. His defeat is rooted in poetic justice that plays upon his character flaw of being unable to comprehend the selfishness of a hero. But with Eris, it would be generous to say she was truly defeated, given the fact that her payoff happens without a bang, but more of a shrug.
I've got places to go, things to destroy, stuff to steal.